know if you use this for the recording or not.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Well, welcome, everyone. My name is Arun Prakash. I'm an alumnus of IIT from 1999, BS in Aerospace Engineering. So thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. This is one of the alumni events in the Chicago region, and hopefully you've been keeping up. The Chicago regional chapter got kicked off last year and has started with great success. There's been a lot of events. There's 5 branches in Chicago, and north suburbs, west suburbs, it's downtown, south suburbs, probably some other mix of the two directions. But so there's a lot of events going on, so keep up with your email, see what's happening. I know that a couple of the chapters are having regular like happy hours and whatnot, so please stay involved that way. This series, this event tonight is part of a career development and professional development series that we've just started working on. So just to back up, I'm on the Alumni Association Board of Directors, and we've identified that IIT really wasn't, doing a lot of programming for alumni in the area of professional and career development. So we've started putting these seminars together and working with IIT staff to add more programming and more events and more help and more resources on the website. So this is just one of many things that are going on. We kicked off the career series in February of this year with the speaker on campus who spoke about social media and enhancing your brand. Tonight, I'll get to tonight's speaker, but we're also having webinars throughout the year, so stay tuned for some webinar announcements coming up where you can dial in from your desk or watch everything recorded on the website at your convenience. So we're really excited about all the new programming that's going to happen for alumni, and hopefully you guys are too, and you can spread the word. In general, just with IIT, I wanted to say a few more things. So encourage you guys to continue to get involved with IIT, coming to events. Other things you can do that are very simple is join the IIT social media sites, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. A lot of conversations are happening there, and I know. Especially LinkedIn, there's a lot of more professional development type stuff going on there, so check that out. There's the alumni directory at alumni.iit.edu, and you can go and you can look up your old classmates and see where they're at, or try to get in touch with folks, and the university can help you do that as well if you're looking to network that way. If you're hiring, you can send the job posting to IIT, and hopefully an IIT alum or student can fit that job. And then outside of work, just recommending seniors or juniors and seniors to apply to IIT if they're interested in STEM fields like engineering or architecture. And then sending your class notes to the magazine for an update. And then last of all, you can always give gift to IIT to support students and their academic endeavors. A few updates from IIT that I wanted to share as well. Right now, total enrollment is just under 8,000, the highest since 1950. So that's great, and IIT continues to grow. And the undergraduate population is on track to be at 4,000 within the next 3 years. So this is very exciting. There's a capital campaign happening right now where IIT is raising $250 million. And it started a year or so ago, and they've raised $185 million so far. It goes through the end of 2016, so any gifts through then will go toward the capital campaign. And so don't donate to any presidential candidates until then. IIT's easy. Any pledges? Okay, yeah. So you don't have to pay.
That's a pretty good deal.
A continued receivable from me forever. One of the big things that are coming out of the capital campaign, in addition to scholarships and everything, is the Ed Kaplan Family Institute for Innovation and Tech Entrepreneurship. So it's going to be the first new academic building on campus in 40 years, and it's going to house a lot of innovation programs for IIT undergrads and the campus. So it's very exciting. The Institute of Design is going to move there from downtown, so it's just going to create a great environment on campus. They're renovating E1. If you get to campus, you'll see that. And then the Life Science building is also being renovated. So a lot of good things happening on campus. And if you haven't been down to campus recently, you'll see the neighborhood has also changed for the better, and it's just become, IT has really stepped up its game and become a much better place than maybe it was 20 years ago. Just some stats here. So IT was recently ranked number 12 on the Business Insider's list of most underrated colleges in America. So hopefully the underrated title is gone soon, and everyone expects us to be great. And then another firm ranked IIT 24th in the nation, 5th in the Midwest, and best in Illinois for earning potential of alumni. So hopefully that points to some good stuff for everyone. And then the big event this year in September is IIT's 125th anniversary. So on September 18th is IIT's Spirit Day for the year, but throughout the year there are going to be events happening, and so keep up to date with those. There's a flyer on the tables talking about some of the things that are going on. IIT has a new president this year. He's going to be inaugurated on that weekend, and Bob Hull, who's a colleague of mine on the alumni board and alumnus from 1970, I believe, is here, and he's leading the charge on some of that stuff. So, Bob, anything else to mention there?
The 125th Spirit Day, that's on September 18th, is on a Friday. That's the kickoff for homecoming that weekend. So please come back down to campus. There will be a lot of good programs put on.
Is it also the reunion weekend?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So September 18th, Friday. Mark your calendars.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks once again. Let's get started with the event. So I'm pleased to introduce Andy Kaufman, and we're fortunate to have him here. He's going to speak about project management and careers in project management. Andy is the president of the Institute for Leadership Excellence and Development, and he has over 25 years of experience in management, leadership, technology, coaching. He's a certified PMP, project management professional, and a member of the Project Management Institute. He's also an author. And before starting his firm, he held management and technology positions at the AC Nielsen Company, CCC Information Services, and Baxter. So without further ado, I welcome Andy Kaufman.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I worked with Bill Lamb for a number of years. You guys know Bill by any chance? Yeah, it's a real pleasure to do that. And let me just open by asking this. First of all, you came because you thought the name Andy Kaufman, you thought the dead comedian was going to be here, right? Somebody was thinking that, all right? You weren't? Okay, good. Who here would say, I'm a project manager? Raise your hands. Anybody? All right, yeah. So I'm interested in your take on it. What does a project manager do? I know, if I gave you more time, you could come up with a more brilliant answer, but what would you say?
Well, I'm a construction project manager,
Sure.
so I take the project from beginning to end, construction-wise,
Yeah.
entitlements through turnover.
Yeah, okay, got it. So you got your hand on the wheel from before they start digging or whatever to, okay, yeah. And Mike, how about you?
I heard cats.
You heard cats, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the IT area,
Sure.
so it's really just getting building what the stakeholders want on time and
Yeah.
meeting their spec.
Yeah. And this can vary by industry, kind of like was implied, like IT versus construction. It can vary depending on the company culture. There's lots of different ways. But if we're going to talk about project management tonight, it might be helpful to get a kind of a common level set because it can mean different things to different people. So this is the definition from the Project Management Institute, PMI, okay? So when I say PMI, that's what I'm talking about. So this is their definition of project management. Now when you look at this definition up here, anything stand out to you, word or phrase? What'd you say? This would be the group participation part of the program. So. Requirements, okay? Yeah. Pretty key part of it. What else? What is it we're doing if we are leading projects?
Guiding the activities.
Yeah. And so what are we doing? You see how it's talking up there about it takes some knowledge to do this. It takes some skills to, at some level, knowledge and skills sounds pretty similar to me. So how would you guys differentiate knowledge from skills? What would you say?
I differentiate it by knowing what needs to get done, and skills is the ability to do it on your own.
Right. So sometimes we say like the head knowledge or maybe the book smart, street smart. We might say head knowledge versus I know how to do it. I guess everywhere I go, it seems like everyone's always younger now, and so I hesitate when I'm teaching a project management class because right about this part, I think back to when I got out of college. I didn't realize how stupid I really was, compared to how things really get done, because I had some head knowledge about how I got done, but in the real world, it was just quite different. So there is something about both of those, of the knowledge and the skills. Actually, schools tend to pump out a lot of knowledge, and it takes a while to develop the skills. Sometimes the best way to learn how to run projects is to actually do it. In fact, that's the way a lot of people get into the project management arena. They didn't say, someday, mommy or daddy, I hope to be a project manager. They just tend to be good at this domain. I started as a software developer, and then it kind of developed, kind of moved this way. All right. I don't think we necessarily set people up to fail by putting them in a project management role because they have knowledge but they don't have skills. But I've certainly seen that before. They have some knowledge of the industry or whatever, but they haven't necessarily developed the skills to deliver it. And so I think that is, I think an interesting point about this is we actually need both of those. I host a podcast on iTunes called the People and Projects Podcast, and I've interviewed two authors in the last couple of years who talk about this guy named David McClelland. He's a former Harvard researcher. He's no longer alive. He wrote a book called Human Motivation, right? So if you pick up the book, it's like this thick. If you try to read it, it feels like this thick, right? It's a highly academic treatment on it. But the guy's not a pundit. But one of the things he says is that you and I are most motivated when we only have a 50 to 70% likelihood of success. Is that kind of interesting? Yeah, so Diane, what was your reaction about that?
That's human nature.
Yeah, so kind of human nature. Anybody want to rationalize that? In fact, let me ask it differently. Before you took your last role, okay, so maybe you're in your job for a few years, a few months, maybe you've been in it for many years, but before you took that last role, what percentage of success did you want before you started it? Right. I think 100% is a fair answer, isn't it? Yeah. And I was teaching a PMP prep series that was kind of over a course of months. And there was a lady in the class. She had worked in Ohio, took a job with a company here. Was very excited. It's a project management role. She goes, I wanted more of a project management role. And in fact, it was one step before a real project manager. I can't remember what their title was there, but it's kind of like at the step towards there. And she goes, I feel like this is going to give me an opportunity. By the end of the series, she actually lost her job. There was a big reorg. And she goes, what have I done? I sold my house, I left my friends and family behind. It was winter in Chicago, for goodness sake. I mean, all these things, it just seemed like it was such a bad decision. She wanted 100% like of success, and she's like, look, I didn't get it. And yet McClellan said, you are more motivated when you only have a 50 to 70% like of success. All right? So Dan said human nature. Rationalize that a little bit more for me.
Fight or flight.
Fight or flight, right? If you've ever had a job, I don't know, maybe you're there now. But if you've ever had a job where you could basically just phone it in, it's just another day making donuts, so to speak. If you've ever had a job like that, how motivating is that? Chuck, you ever had that? Not very motivating. No, not at all. And so I like to bring that up when in the context of project management overall, because sometimes people hesitate to take on a project, or they just, I don't want to take this on because I don't have 100% likelihood of success, which I actually don't, I'm not sure the world offers that to us anyway. I think often that's not the case. Statistically, even in a group like this, I think some of you have been holding back maybe on a project, maybe on a career move, maybe on just a potential bringing up an idea to a boss about a potential thing you might want to do because you don't have 100% likelihood of success if you get it. Whether it's a project or whether it's on the career side, keep McClellan's numbers in mind. I have to tell you, I've learned this a couple of years back. I've been taking on some engagements where I had an engagement just recently with the McCaskey family. Okay, so if you're familiar with the Bears, they called and said there's a certain thing we want. I was quite sure I did not have a 100% likelihood of success because of what they wanted to address. But I had at least a 70, took it, went just fine. I'm a lot more comfortable at 70 than I am at 50. But keep that number in mind, right? Whether it's project, whether it's career, whatever, right? Now, in this definition, it talks about tools, it talks about a number of different things, but really, this is where I want to get to. What's the point of project management? Because if we're talking about a career in project management, what's the point, according to PMI, of project management? to meet the project requirements. And I'd like to just sit on that point for a second, because I think a lot of people think a career in project management, oh my goodness, the thick methodology documents. I mean, this is going to be, how often do you walk in and say, hi, I'm the project manager, I'm here to help? People want to scatter. It's like being an auditor in some organizations. They just like, it doesn't, I don't know if that's me. Every once in a while, I'll run into somebody that says, project management really is just process for the sake of process. It's just hoops to jump through. Just like Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank and any of the other regulatory stuff that's come out, it's just going to slow us down. And if we do this sort of stuff, what we used to get done in 3 days is going to take 3 weeks or months, and it's just process for the sake of process. But even according to PMI, which can be overly academic at times, no. What project management is about is delivery. Project management, at the end of the day, is how do we go from idea to delivery. Now that delivery might be, are you commercial or residential or commercial? It might be the idea of, all right, this new commercial building is available, this new software thing is delivered. It could be all kinds of different things. But ultimately, what this is about, a career step towards project management, which is why I think it is such a great career track, because we get to deliver stuff. We don't just talk about it, we actually get to go off and deliver it. I've got a brother-in-law, lived in Tucson for many years. He and his wife, he's an infectious disease doc, researcher as well. His wife's a pediatrician. After the kids went to college, they just said, we're packing up. They moved to Kenya. He's the second certified infectious disease doc guy in the country. It's a really kind of an amazing story. But what he studies Giardia, which I didn't know this, but it's what causes diarrhea. So there you go. Someone's looking into it. I just wanted to be clear about this. But anyway, he goes, I will move the research on this much over the course of my career. I would go nuts at that. I think the worst job would be the rental car driver between the lot and the terminal 80 times a day. I want variety, and project managers, we get that. And we get to deliver stuff, and we get to deliver things that help people. So that's why I think it's a great career. Was that a hand there, or no? No? Okay. All right, great. So increasingly we're seeing in organizations, they're saying, we want project managers. It's a increasingly a valued title as people are pursuing this. And in fact, increasingly what we're seeing is not just PM wanted, but PMP wanted. Okay? And so it's we don't just want somebody who can say they can run projects, we want some sort of certification, especially after the last downturn in the economy. It seems like certifications matter even more. Because if we get this many resumes, how do we sort through them? The truth is, just getting a PMP doesn't mean you're a great project manager. I've had people in classes before that I'm like, seriously, how did you get that certification? So it's not a guarantee, but doggone it, when it comes to the filter of their resume, that's at least one of those things that they can look at. It's a fine certification, it's globally recognized, and so from that standpoint, it's good. In fact, this might be actually kind of hard to read, but these are the latest numbers that PMI has advertised or made public, so end of March of this year. But the number of people with PMPs now around the world, 650,000. Right? So that's a lot of people that have got that on their resume. So if this is a track you're thinking about, you're going to want to pursue that, because it's just one of those things that can kind of separate you from someone else. And I will say it's probably one of the more difficult tests I took, but it's totally passable. Totally passable. Anybody here taking the PMP? Yeah, right? It's passable, right? Yeah, it's passable. It's work. But it's not like it's an MBA where you give up a couple years of your life, right? I mean, it can take up a couple months of your life, but it is totally doable. But around the world, there's this growing appreciation for this is one of those certifications that can actually matter. Want to see some salary numbers? Here, if you can read it. I pulled this off just today. So this is as of May 21st, 2015, in the Chicago area. About the halfway mark on that scale is $130,000 a year. Right? You can see there was the senior program manager in e-commerce is a little bit higher. VMware, some more specific things, just a little bit lower. But I mean, that's a pretty good track from a technology perspective. If you enjoy kind of the process of delivering stuff, it's definitely a good track to consider there. So let me just say, from a career perspective, it's a good time to be a project manager. I was interviewing a guy who he runs the Standish Group out in Boston, and it could be it was just a bad day because after the whole Tom Brady thing, I don't know. But he thinks there's a day where maybe 20 years from now, that it will morph into a different role. But this is what I do know, regardless of what the title is that we need people who will shepherd this idea into something different, okay? So if it's called something different, that I found that a lot of organizations will outsource plenty of roles, and sometimes program managers and project managers, but a lot of times that's the role they keep internally. And I was at an organization out in DC, spent a lot of time there in the last year, and they blew apart their IT organization. I mean, nuked it. Hundreds of people let go. We're going all service providers, okay? But guess who they kept? Their project managers. Because we need somebody who's going to be bird dogging those service providers, somebody that knows us, knows our culture, and will work with the other ones. So it's a great time to be a project manager, but if you ever look at some of the statistics on project success rates, depends on whose numbers you look at, there's still a good challenge on how do we deliver these things. It varies certainly by industry, but there's some challenges there, right? So what I wanted to focus on is not only telling you I think it's a great place to go and to consider, but also let's talk about some competence around this. Let's talk about what does it take to do a good job at this. So let's start with, instead of, typical training class says, well, project management's pretty easy, right? It's just like time management should be pretty easy. Just identify your to-dos, you prioritize them and do them, right? Well, project management should be pretty easy. You just figure out what you need to do and put together a plan and do it. It's that simple, isn't it? No, it's not that simple. What are some things in the real world that make it difficult to deliver your projects, regardless of whether you're a project manager or not?
Changing requirements.
Okay, so we got people. We got changing requirements can be changing people, right? What else?
Money.
Yeah. Given enough time or money, we can do anything, right? I don't work for that company.
That's how you spend it.
That's how you spend it, for sure. Yeah, all right, what else?
Change your priorities.
Yeah, this was the priority, now this is the priority, and just when you kind of get some momentum, things can change. There can be changes in the economy, there can be a competitive threat that changes things. I mean, there's all kinds of things in the real world that makes it difficult.
You get other agendas.
Right, yeah, it could be, in fact, I was just talking to a guy down in Texas who, pretty high level exec, and I just was checking in with him, and I was like, how's it going? He goes, well, we got a new CIO, and he's blowing apart the organization. Basically, he told everybody, you're fired, you have to interview for your job now. And he goes, man, it's just a lot of disruption, and that, but the project work is still trying to go on while everyone else is like, is there a bullseye on me? How am I going to survive this? It's interesting. There's just a lot of changes. I grew up as a software developer. That's how I started my career. And I work with all kinds of different domains now. But growing up in IT, I often heard things like this. If we just do things the right way, if we get the right people on our projects, if our company would just give us the right tools, the right fill in the blank, then everything would be fine. What's the potential downside of saying it that way, do you think? That you'd be okay on your projects if you just had the, is it Bunny?
Yes.
Yeah, Bunny. What's the potential downside of saying it that way?
Well, you'll never find the right people.
What does right even mean there, right? Yeah.
You don't know what it means.
Right. It's pretty subjective. Kind of comes off as excuses. The right way is the Bonnie way, by the way. Right, that's what it is. But it's when it comes to understanding this, I live up in the northwest suburbs, up in Lake Zurich, and I got to know the former mayor of Riverwoods. Now Riverwoods probably feels like Wisconsin from here, but it's up north, and he's a former mayor. And I wanted to talk to him about what's it like to be a mayor of a small town, because I've heard it's just as bad as big city politics because everyone knows you. Okay, so I'm like, what's it like to be a mayor of a small town? And he goes, well, let me say it this way. First year in office, let's say there's 10 people. I'm at a dinner party, there's 10 people. 2 out of 10 don't like me. Because I don't know why, it just seems like 2 out of 10 don't like me. Second year in office, 4 out of 10 don't like me. Third year, by the end of my term, doesn't matter where I go, 8 out of 10 people don't like me. I'm like, wow, that sounds very discouraging. You saw that with Rahm Emanuel downtown, right? Just one term in office, he ticked off a bunch of people. You see it with President Obama, you saw it with President Bush before that. The longer you're in office, basically what he said is, the more opportunity you have to tick people off. I'm like, so how'd you learn to rationalize that? That sounds pretty depressing. He goes, this is what I learned. That when you're in the general public, you have the right to see things in black and white. So we should deal with ISIS differently or not. Our policy, the Affordable Care Act was good or not. He goes, you have the right to see things in black and white. But he said when you're in leadership, you have to see the, what? What would you guess?
All the colors.
Yeah, he said shades of gray, but it's basically the same thing what you're saying. And the reason why I want to bring this up is if you want to get good at delivering projects, there's a lot of shades of gray. A lot of shades of gray. As your projects get bigger, as the number of people on your teams get bigger, there's lots of shades of gray. There's not like these 5 easy steps to go off and deliver projects. In fact, let me give you some statistics from the real world. This is from the Standish group that I mentioned before. So they looked at, check out the number of projects. This, N equals 40,000 here. So this is not a, hey, we called 5 people and talked about their projects. 40,000 projects over 10 years. The average project exceeded its budget by 43%. Can you imagine I can't imagine keeping my job if I exceeded my budget by 43%, right? And when it comes to like success or failure or challenged, basically what that's saying is only 1 out of every 3 or so are considered to be successful. So I got to interview the founder of this for the podcast, and I asked him, well, how do you, if you look at any one project, you can kind of figure out success, But if you abstract this out over 40,000 projects, how do you measure success? What do you think he included? The project is successful if on time, on budget. There's actually one more.
ROI.
Yeah, in this case, the way they measured value of some sort is if there's something that we're going to deliver to an external customer, did anyone buy it? Which is kind of interesting. Or if it's an internal project, did it ever get used? Okay. Yeah. And so challenge was, man, now that we did this project, now that we know what we know, would we do this project again? That's a lot of projects up there that fit in that. This is a big lesson in project management, is that it's almost always bigger than what we think. It's almost always going to take longer than what we think. Right? I heard a construction maxim is that it double, half. It takes twice as long, costs twice as much, and you like it half as much afterwards. I don't think that's true with your projects, but I've heard that to be true. All right, so I show this not to depress you, not to think, this is actually to show, listen, there's opportunity here to make it better because companies don't have all this cash to be thrown around anymore. And we need to improve it. And in fact, I could show you an earlier version of this case study where that number was in half as far as the success. Okay? So there are definitely ways to do it. So this is a list here from the Gartner Group. I've seen many different lists of leading causes of project failure. This is not the definitive list, but it's actually a pretty good list. When you look at this list up here, does any of them jump out to you as ones you've seen on projects before? Yeah, what do you think?
Frames is
Yeah, the unrealistic time frames. I've had the opportunity to share this slide probably on every continent, I think, and almost always, doesn't matter where, doesn't matter the industry, that's almost always the first one that comes up. So if you're concerned that that's an issue with only your company, almost every company is hit this date. So this is, if you get into this sort of career, almost always you're going to be given the due date and you're going to be like, what? Right? But there are techniques to be able to deal with that for sure. What else? What else jumps out at you when you look at that list? No clear objectives. Yeah, I think it's interesting. It doesn't. Right. Yeah. And it's not that there are no objectives. It's just the lack of clarity. And so something I've kind of learned to watch is, you kind of have to start at 30,000 feet. But if you stay at 30,000 feet, you're in trouble. In fact, I interviewed a guy, Tom DeMarco. If you're in the IT industry, he's like a granddaddy. And one thing Tom said in the interview is that when requirements when your project work stays at a really, really high level, it's a sign of unresolved conflict, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if I would have connected those dots, but his point is we can all agree as long as we're here. Like, it doesn't matter if you tend to lean right or left politically. I think just about every party would say the national debt is an issue. Where do you get into arguments? How to fix it. All right? That's the thing. Same thing on projects. We can all agree that something is important here, but where do we get in the arguments? It's down here. So a good project manager will say, listen, in fact, I was talking to somebody just recently. They said they're like business development people are like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. And they go, when can we have it? They're like, we don't even know what it is. Right? And so in this career, you're faced with that often on the front end. It's a lot of uncertainty. Our job is you don't go from 30,000 feet to sea level because that doesn't feel good on the stomach, right? But our job is to navigate it down and to bring it in for a landing. One more. In fact, let me ask you the last one here. You see that last one says denial of risk? I think that's an interesting one.
That change is easy.
What's that?
So, but that change is easy.
Yeah, that change is easy. Come on, Chuck. Don't be so negative, right? Right, yeah. Denial of risk is different from being risk averse, isn't it? Right? Like, what's the difference between being risk averse and denial of risk?
The ability to acknowledge that the risk is there
Yeah.
versus, yeah. that
It's all
there
good.
versus- yeah.
Right, yeah. So one is, do we go around it? There was I had a guy in a PMP prep series recently who they make like hydroelectric dams and power generation plants and all this. I mean, big projects. And he goes, this one customer wanted us to do some scuba work. And I don't know how, why, or whatever, but we decided we don't do scuba, right? And they just decided that's not something we do because it was just going to be too risky. That was going to be a level of risk. That's being risk averse. That's looking at it and saying denial of risk is scuba. If you'll pay us, we'll figure out how to do it, right? And interestingly, denial of risk is the deadly one. That's just not that's not just a project management issue. This is a life issue. Right? I don't have to join groups like this. My job is secure. I don't need to network. Right? That's denial of risk. Right? There's so many aspects of that applies in other areas. So I think this is actually a pretty interesting list. So what I wanted to do is to spend the time that we have talking about just if we had to get 5 keys, just some 5 keys on if you were in this sort of role that would be helpful for you to know. What would some of those be? And this is what it's going to start with. I'm going to start with down at the bottom here of the manage yourself. I had the opportunity just recently to interview Gretchen Rubin. Have you ever heard of Gretchen Rubin? She wrote this book called The Happiness Project. I purposely didn't read the book because it sounded too happy. No, but I don't know. I didn't necessarily resonate with some of the ideas I read, but I was a little bit more intrigued about this book. It's called Better Than Before. I haven't published the episode. It probably won't be published until sometime in June. But it's all about habits and developing habits. And I found that good project managers have learned there are certain habits that we need to develop. In addition to that, by the way, these slides will be made available so you don't have to take a bunch of notes. In fact, when you pull these down, if you click on the little speaker icon there, it'll take you to the interview. The interviews are all free. There's no charge. So don't go off and buy the book until maybe, at least you might want to consider listening to the interview and then say, all right, that does sound interesting or not. And then, so if one of them grabs your attention, you can do that. Tony Schwartz wrote this terribly titled book, but a wonderful book. Now, I think it's a terrible title because actually it's hard to read there, isn't it? But it's Be Excellent at Anything is the title. 100% expectation. Yeah, I just feel like be excellent at anything. There's all kinds of things I will never be excellent at. Actually, when it first came out, and it's in really small print, you can't see it, but the title was The Way We're Working Isn't Working, which I think is a brilliant title. That's actually why I got in touch with them, because I thought it was such a good sounding book. But regardless of the title, all kinds of really interesting and helpful ways to improve our productivity has applicability far beyond project management. And then the last one is Tom Rath. I've had the opportunity to interview him twice. In fact, he's the most recent episode right now. If you're familiar with StrengthsFinders, he's the StrengthsFinders guy, former Gallup. I think technically he's still with Gallup. But he wrote this book called Eat, Move, Sleep. All right? So I'm just going to have you take a wild guess. What do you think the book Eat, Move, Sleep is about? What would you guess? Yeah, what do you think, Dave?
You're living,
Yeah.
The 3 things in life, right?
Yeah. His point is that most of us could probably eat better, we could probably move more, and we need to sleep more, okay? So, you check it out. There's all kinds of things you could have been doing tonight instead of this. So good for you for investing in this. But this is one of the things I found is that a lot of project managers, people leading teams and initiatives, one of the first things we do is we check out on ourselves or we sacrifice ourselves. And I don't care what your Gantt charts look like. I don't care what your domain expertise is. If you're too wasted when you walk into the office because you're just not sleeping enough. I do a lot of executive coaching. I had a guy who said on average he gets 4 hours of sleep a night. On average. Okay? And I can just tell you that that's denial of risk, actually, I would wager to say. That's just not sustainable. Okay? And so my point on this one is whether it's a project management or some of the best career advice. I mean, you get it on the airplane, right? With the whole mask, you got to put it on yourself first. It's the same thing when it comes to most of us don't get enough sleep. In fact, there's a Harvard Medical School guy that Tony Schwartz talks about in his book. He goes, like a drunk, most people do not realize how impaired they are because of lack of sleep. In fact, he goes further on it, that most of us don't even know what it means to be awake anymore. Okay?
We don't realize what, I'm sorry.
Well, we don't realize what it even means to be awake because it's, the rock star, the Red Bull, and, the everything to kind of keep us going. So my point on this one is to be effective at leading projects, there's so much uncertainty. There's the team, the people. Increasingly, project managers are responsible for the project, but the people don't report necessarily to them, right? So you have to influence that authority. You got to be on top of your game. Now, Tony has so many good things in his book. Things like, for example, pulse. He'll say, never work on something for more than 90 minutes straight. Never. Somehow, somewhere in 90 minutes or less, stand up, stretch, take a walk, get a drink, not vodka, okay? But go to the water fountain, do something, go take a walking, something. And it's very consistent with what Tom Rath talks about, just moving more. But there's something about that, just a little bit of a break, that you come back, and they both quote studies about how you make up that time because you're fresher, okay? Project managers, don't you spend a lot of time in meetings? I mean, look, you're in a meeting again tonight, right? It just feels, in fact, I don't know if your company does take your child to work day sort of thing. My son's really good friend went to work with his dad. He comes home, this is back when they're like 9 years old, and he says to my son, he goes, Zach, do you know what my dad does for a living? He goes, no, what does your dad do? He goes, he goes to meetings. It doesn't seem like that sometimes. And so both of these guys will say, you need to get moving. Sitting is the new smoking. And that, we have to find ways to do it. So a very practical thing, believe it or not, to be a better project manager, get moving. If this is a meeting with just one other person, do it as a walking meeting, but do something to kind of break up that day. The reason I put Gretchen up there in her book is a lot of times people go, all right, I want to sleep more, I want to eat better, I want to whatever. And this book is just filled with really practical ideas of how to change your habits. A lot of times people say, well, the life you live is because of the choices you make now. But she would say it's not even just the choices you make now, it's the habits you develop now. And effective project managers, I'd say effective leaders overall, develop these habits of, first of all, how do we take care of ourselves? And so, in this case here, can you think of a change or two? Like I use a standing desk now. Man, for the first month, my feet were killing me. It takes a while to get used to it. But if you can, whatever it is, maybe it's, I target 7 hours of sleep, but this thing here tells me how much I really get. And I'm in bed for 7 hours often, but I'm not getting 7 hours of sleep. So maybe it's for you. Maybe that's just something for the second half of the year. Like, I'm going to take care of that. Or I'm just going to move a little bit more. Something along those lines can help. And then here, about from a career habit perspective, showing up for the series that's going on right now is awesome. Because even if you're not looking for a job, right, to understand how can I invest in my career, you're doing something right here. Far more people ought to be doing this. Drag some people with you if you know some alumni that aren't showing up, because this is the sort of thing of developing the habit. You're pouring into yourself. That's what you need to do to be prepared for the challenges. The projects don't get easier, right? The projects only get more difficult. So that was the manage yourself. How about managing on the people side? I actually pretty fundamentally believe that the dirty little secret of business is that it all comes down to people. Would you buy that? The only reason why you got hired, the only reason why many people get promoted, it comes down to the people side. It comes down to people. It comes down to relationships. Now, I think it's fair to say it's not dirty, it's not little, and it's not a secret, okay? But I don't know if you got this in your IIT classes, but I didn't get it in school. I didn't get in school that it's all about the people side. If I learned anything in school about the people side, it's who to sit next to. Maybe that was part of it. But I think intellectually we know that, man, we need to be developing relationships. I think we know that, but too often this is me at my desk. Is this you at your desk? It's like, I know, but I got, who's got time for it? Who's got time for it? You could have come up with a handful of excuses to not come tonight. There are probably 20 name tags out on the desk out there. of people who said, yeah, something's going to come up, right? There's all kinds of excuses that we can make. And yet this is one of those fundamental things from a career perspective, also on a project perspective, because I have to influence this stakeholder. They don't report to me. They have more political clout. I can't just go kick their butt. And so developing the relationships are just critical. So if you want to grow up, I was at one of my executive coaching clients. He went from a manager to a director to a CTO in the course of about 2 years. Now, I'd love to say it was brilliant coaching, but it wasn't that. One of his pretty good friends was a C-level executive there. Now, they didn't do it just because they're buddies, but he spent time understanding what goes on in those circles. What do they look at? What do they talk about? What do they, and there was a comfort level that was developed. And when you're running projects, the sponsor, whoever's funding it, has got to be your number, you have, not necessarily your number one stakeholder, although it's pretty close. They don't have to even be a best friend, but you need to know what keeps them awake at night. What are their priorities for this project? And her name is Herminia Ibarra. It was she's considered one of the number 9 on the Thinkers 50 list of leading thinkers of leadership. Had her on the podcast a couple episodes ago. And she says our networks, she calls them narcissistic, which certainly doesn't sound very good, right? But basically what she's saying is we network with people who are too much like us. So you're only in the construction, right? Which isn't necessarily true for you because look where you're at, right? But too often we just do that and we're not necessarily reaching out enough. And there's good research that says weak ties, people that you don't necessarily see that often will help you more. When you've got a problem, you got this issue on somebody, so you went to school with them maybe 15 years ago, but you haven't necessarily stayed in touch. All of a sudden you go to a meeting, you meet them and say, I got this sort of project thing going on. You've diverged enough in your path that they're experiencing things that you haven't experienced. So that's another benefit of groups like this, is it can get you in touch with some of those people that you haven't. It can help you from maybe solve some problems, but certainly help you, understand maybe more, get different perspectives. And when it comes to the people side of things, I suppose this guy's been one of the most valuable guys in my life. Anybody recognize this? This is not my grandpa.
Dale Carnegie.
That would be Dale Carnegie, right? Still, to this day, one of the best business books. And in that How to Win Friends, Influence People, Dale says a certain percent of your success comes down to your professional knowledge. What number would you guess that is? 5. So small. You're saying less than 50? Anybody else want to take a wager at that? What would you guess? So, Alex? What's the number, Alex?
5 sounds good to me.
5 sounds good to you, okay? Yeah.
20.
Yeah. Actually, what he says in the book, so guys, your instinct was exactly right. It says 15. What's the other 85%? It's your ability to express ideas, assume leadership, and arouse enthusiasm among people, okay? A key characteristic of being a project manager is you can only get stuff done through your team and through other people, right? And you could say that's really not a project management issue. It's certainly something that relates to a lot of other people. Now, what I think sometimes gets confused is we think of, well, someone's an introvert, so we need to send them to a Dale Carnegie class. Right? And so this is, I had Dan Pink on the podcast not too long ago. If you're familiar with Dan, his book Drive and his more recent book To Sell is Human. And he talks about this. Actually, a really good Washington Post article on this. If this is highly introverted and this is highly extroverted, where are the best salespeople? So that's introverted, this is extroverted. Where are the best salespeople, would you guess? Yeah, you think like 6 or 7, right? The best accountants? Yeah, 1 or 2, right, yeah. All right, so guess what? There's been consistent research now finding that 4s rule the world, okay? They call them ambiverts, which is kind of a crazy term. But the idea is that even from a sales perspective, the 7s, they don't shut up. Right? And a lot of selling, a lot of project management is listening. It's trying to understand what are they actually talking about, right? And the person that doesn't shut up, that's getting in their way. But aren't there times you need to speak up? There are times we need to speak up. Someone's sitting right next to you in the meeting, they come up with an idea, and the boss goes, that's a great idea. And you're like, I was thinking that, right? So there are times where we need to speak up maybe more than we do. But if you're more over here, don't stay away from a project management career because you think, well, you got to be with people all the time. So some of the best project managers I know are over here in this range. Okay? Oddly enough, I do this for a living. I'm more over here. Okay? But I just know when I'm doing this, I need to kind of go like this, and I'll go home and not talk to anyone. Right? And so same thing for you, that you don't, if you feel like you're more of a 1 or 2, don't try to go up to a 7. It's not you, you wouldn't like it anyway, but you might have to ramp it up to a 4. Okay? So when it's dealing with people, that's the case. And there's also, there's all kinds of different models, whether it's DISC, whether there are others, that just says, you know what, understand that people have different styles. And the different styles that they have, we need to adjust our style to other people. That's really what it comes down to. We need to adjust our styles to other people. So one of the best bosses I ever hated to work for was a really tough boss, extreme driver. I'm really a laid-back person. So I'd show up in meetings, I'd kick my shoes off. Might as well just be comfortable, right? And her name was Cindy. Guess what Cindy's thinking about Andy? Cindy, the extreme driver, thinking about the laid-back Andy with his shoes off and cracking jokes in the meeting. What's she thinking? Yeah, slacker. Doesn't understand the sense of urgency. So it took me longer than it should have, but I learned what I needed to do was adjust my style. And by adjusting my style to Cindy, all of a sudden she's like, Andy's coming around. Andy wasn't coming around. I just learned how to speak her language. Far more than we realize, we're giving off signals of, are we taking it serious? Are we in the game or not? And regardless of the model, this is a model I use in some classes, but it's just, there are all kinds of good models. Almost all of them will say, understand your style, but adjust to others. I had a guy named Nick Morgan a couple times on the podcast, and Nick wrote this is the most recent book. But what he'd say is, it's actually a pretty fascinating book on a lot of different levels, kind of a body language book. And I've kind of shied away from some of those, but there's some pretty practical advice that he has in this book. But he says there's always two conversations going on. So you've probably seen something like this, perhaps, a guy out at UCLA named Marabi, and he looked at words, body language, and focal tone. So when you're talking to your stakeholders, or you're talking to a boss, or you're talking to a spouse or a loved one, there's always two conversations going on made up of words, body language, and focal tone. So what % of your communication do you think comes down to words? What would you guess? Okay. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Well, this guy in Moravian at UCLA found the number is 7. Yeah. So was that 7 or 70, did you say? 7. That's awesome. Way to go. All right. So what do you think is bigger between body language and vocal tone? The body. Yeah, body language, 55, and then the vocal tone, 38. So the way this is often taught is it's not what you say, it's, which is exactly wrong. Because if you walk up to your boss with gentle body language and a kind vocal tone and go, you're an idiot, you're still fired, right? But what Nick Morgan really clarified in the interview was it's when these are not aligned that makes the difference, okay? So if Cindy walked up to me and go, hey, Andy, how's your project going? I'm like, it's going great, right? What did my words say? It's going great. But my body language and vocal tone were screaming that something's up. Effective project managers, effective leaders overall, will say, I've got to get these aligned. And you can, Nick's book is filled with ideas on how to use this from an influence perspective. So I'll recommend that book to you there. But from the managing people, you're already doing, I'm so proud of you for coming to something like this tonight because you're investing in that. How can I continue to invest in relationships in your organization? Do you go to lunch with the same people? Could you be branched out a little bit further within your organization? Take advantage of opportunities for events like this. Can you adjust your style? I'm going to speak briefly on risks. I had this guy named Dr. David Hilson on the podcast. He's written 9 books on risks based over in the UK. And one of his colleagues named Tim Lister says, project management, or actually the quote is, risk management is how adults manage projects. And I think that's kind of a clever way to say it. A lot of project management comes down to this, of managing risk. And there's all kinds of methodology around it, but this is what I would say, is that with your team, if you don't have some sort of formal risk management thing, just try this, just this one thing. Then when someone goes, man, I'm really worried about this, John, I'm really worried about this. Say, okay, here it is. What's the probability that risk will occur? And if it does occur, how bad would it be? Just looking at those 2 dimensions, Six Sigma might add a third thing into that of detectability, but even if you go just with these 2, how likely is it that it'll occur and how bad would it be? A lot of things that freak us out have a high impact, but the probability is really low. I was speaking in downtown Chicago last September, on September 11th, and the night before, my daughter was like, Dad, you cannot go down there on 9/11. She's 14. She'd seen a couple things of some stuff on TV. She goes, something's going to happen in Chicago. You can't go down there. And, you know, I'm not making light of that, but a lot of times the things that flip us out, someone on your team is just really concerned, but the probability is so low. So looking at it, probability and impact. And what do you focus on? The things that are the highest combinations of those. So there's all kinds of methodology around this of how do you turn it from fear of it to what do we do about it. But if you are considering a career move in this, or just want to get better at delivering whatever you're doing now, regardless of whether this is a career, learning to manage risks is huge. And getting some learning on this would be really, really helpful. So some questions that I'd kind of pass by you here is, how often are risks talked about on your team? If you bring up a risk, do people look at you kind of like we were joking before of like, hey, don't be so negative. Don't be so negative. How about this? When someone brings a risk to you, how do you respond? And I've got blood on my hands with everything we're talking about tonight, but I would often, somebody bring a risk to me and be like, yeah, we'll take that risk on. Thanks for the feedback, right? And what was I really saying? Nah, that's what I was really saying, right? And learning to look at risks as, listen, this is how you manage projects. What's ahead? What's ahead? And you're not going to get rid of all of them, but it is a glorious way to manage projects. And it is a key to successfully delivering. When it comes to change, probably the single biggest thing that was helpful for me from PMI on this was they refer to it as rolling wave planning, which says that don't try to come up with the perfect plan, right? Because sometimes I guess somebody would say to me is, this whole project management thing, it's just a facade. Seriously, you want to be a project manager? It's just a facade. You can't deliver these things. You're just putting a pretty face on something that's uncontrollable. Okay? But even an organization like PMI would say, no. How do you do projects? You start at the beginning and you articulate everything that's going to happen, but you know it's not going to happen that way. I had a former Vietnam vet on my team once, and he goes, the project schedule is the schedule for exactly how the project will not occur. Which I think is a pretty clever way of saying that there's always going to be change, right? So project managers, you wouldn't be getting yourself into a career where you have to articulate everything and be all-knowing about the future. No, what you do is you set a baseline. A baseline is a little bit like the white lines on the side of the road or the bumps on the side of the road. What are you supposed to do when you're driving and you hit the bumps on the side of the road? Stop texting is actually what you're supposed to do, right? Yeah, but if you don't do that, you're easily in the shoulder, in the ditch, in the field, in the lake, in the field. You're like, how did we get so far behind? But a guy by the name of Fred Brooks was asked that question. How's a project get a year behind? His answer, one day at a time. Because you don't have the baseline. So what do project managers do? We put stakes in the ground. Probably my favorite interview of all last year was this guy who wrote a book called The Procrastination Equation. Right? The guy's a scientist, and he researched procrastination. All right? So check it out. This is time. This is the amount of work that gets done. This is your due date. Time, amount of work that gets done. What does this curve look like? It skews like this. Okay? This happens on projects all the time. Okay? This is something that project managers fight against all the time. So this guy, once again, he's not a pundit, although he's a very entertaining writer. This is what he says to do, right? Right? Put stakes in the ground. And his research found what happens is you go like this, and then you go like this, and you go like this, and you go like this. The work gets done, but it's done incrementally, all right? So I have to tell you, this has changed my life, all right? So it doesn't have to change your life, but I found that this makes all the difference. Set smaller time frames. There's a company in the Chicago area here that hired me to develop a facilitation skills class. And I just know myself, I would have blown January and February. March, I would have started working. April, I would have ramped it up right at the end. What I did was I set checkpoints every Thursday. We got together, and guess what happened? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And it drove the work. And project managers get this. Set a milestone. Set the milestones. Put the stakes in the ground. If you've got something due this summer, okay, you've been probably wasting your May so far. put a stake in the ground. What do I need done by the end of May? What do I need done by mid-June? What by the end of June? Put those stakes in the ground. Now you're faced with the reality of, all right, I'm not hitting these time frames. I better do something instead of waiting for the big jump at the end. Okay? So some questions related to this are, where do you need to put some stakes in the ground? Can you think of some areas? I've been saying I'm going to do this, but I haven't done it. Put some stakes in the ground. And sometimes the way we manage change is we don't think about the other unintended consequences. One of my favorite podcasts is the Freakonomics podcast. And one of the things that they talk about in this podcast over and over and over is that the greatest law of economics is the law of unintended consequences. We make decisions for these consequences, intended, but they have these unintended consequences. And often what happens when change happens on a project, we're like, well, that can't be that big a deal. We'll make this change. How bad can it be, right? And our intended consequences maybe save some time, but the unintended consequence often is quality takes a hit. Okay? All right, so the last one here is managing expectations. Managing expectations, and probably the biggest lesson I've learned with this is that I think life comes down to this one right here. I've been married for 27 years as of last week. I know marriage comes down to managing expectations. I think just about everything comes down to managing expectations. And when it comes to projects, if you manage expectations, it's amazing what you can get away with. You can spend more, take more time if you manage expectations. But if you don't manage expectations and you go one day over, spend $1 more, you're in trouble. And probably the single biggest lesson related to that is you got to know who your stakeholders are. And what I love about PMI's definition, this is PMI's definition here, is that there are probably more stakeholders than what you realize. They're talking about who are we going to impact, who could impact us. How about the third one up there? Who thinks they're going to be impacted, but they're not, but they're freaking out. Okay? When we're running projects, almost always we can forget somebody. Okay? And then when we forget them, like for example, let's say for your project you need legal sign-off on something. And you don't get legal sign-off. What's the impact on your project if you forgot to get legal sign-off? What do you think? What would you say?
Project's over.
It might be. There might be some IP issues. There might be some compliance things that would actually kill the project. Best case is it delays your project. Worst case is it could actually kill the project. And so when it comes to managing expectations, I think the biggest problem with this is we don't take the time to think, who else is out there? Who else is out there? I've actually got one client in the Chicago area. They justify the cost of an entire 2-day training class on project management on this one point here. They're like, we want everybody that goes through to be reminded there are more people being impacted than what we realize. Who else is impacted? And if we think about it, then we can manage their expectations. But if we forget about them, there's no way we're managing those expectations. And I'm amazed at one stakeholder's ability to inflict serious pain on projects. Maybe it's because we needed to talk to them. Other times it's because we effectively didn't kiss their ring. And they felt disrespected because we didn't include them in this discussion. And so chances are there are far more stakeholders. And if you want to do a good job of delivering projects, certainly if you want to do a good job of any sort of role, you got to be thinking, who do I need to be talking? Whose expectations do I need to be managing? You know, when it comes to communicating, what percent of your time should be communicating, would you guess? Well, actually, PMI's got a number. Do you remember when you studied for your PMP? Yeah. On the test, it's 90%. On the test, it's 90%. And when I first heard that, I thought, in what universe does anybody have 90% of their time to communicate? And yet, their point is, you can't manage expectations if you don't talk to them, right? And so here's just one simple little example. This is a simple little texting conversation I had with a guy who's a relatively new taxi driver to the airport. Right? Hello from Lake Zurich. Would you be available for a 320 pickup to O'Hare? What does he text back? He says, yes, no problem. I say, great, thanks. Okay, right? Looks like it's going to be pretty good there, right? It's 3:20. I look out in my driveway. There's no taxi. So I call him, and I say, are you going to be here soon? He goes, I'm here. Where is he? Oh, come on, Diane. How could he possibly, you're right, by the way. So how could he possibly think I meant O'Hare when you look at this? How could he possibly think that? What do you think? I said from Lake Zurich to O'Hare.
No comment.
Can you rationalize this? It's actually easy to rationalize. He had my address because it was in it. But how about this? We think the more we write, the more people are going to get it. It's inversely proportional. The more we write, the more they skim. I wrote too much. I should have just said available at 3:20. But when I put so the lesson on this, psychologists call it the illusion of transparency, which basically means we think people can read our minds. Now, in truth, we don't think people can read our minds. But the interesting social science experiment is, I tap this out. I tap a song. I'm thinking of a song. I tap it out, and you're supposed to understand what this song is. And so sometimes I'll do this with really large groups. It's just chaos. But inevitably, the person tapping's like, come on, this is easy. And the other person's like, woo, I don't know. And the reason why it's easy to this person is because I hear the music in my head. The other person doesn't hear it. When you're running a project, you hear the music in your head. I know what I mean when I send this email, and they're like, dude, why are you so upset? Or what? They don't hear the music in the head. And so part of managing expectations is trying to think and communicate in a way. In fact, I'm to the point where I just assume they're not going to get it. Not because they're stupid, but they're just not going to get it. That there's something about it, the way I'm going to communicate this, that's going to be hard for them to understand. So, who are you impacting on your projects that maybe you haven't thought of? Statistically, you've got some out there. And can you do something to better help people get it? Like increasingly, I'm just rereading it before I send, especially with these. Have you been burned yet by the words changing on you? Just inevitably. And if it's inversely proportional to how much you read, how much you write, how much they actually read, a lot of reading is being done on this. You have to keep it short and get to the point. So these are the 5 keys. Let me wrap it up by saying this. I asked you to raise your hand at the beginning of if you're a project manager. What if it's not a title? I actually have a bias that every one of us in this room is a project manager. We're not by title. But you've got stuff you have to deliver. You've got your day job, but above and beyond your day job, you've got stuff you need to deliver. So everything that we've spent the last 55 minutes talking about, it applies to all of us. We all have to go off and deliver. And I just want to encourage you that if you feel like, you know what, I want a different sort of challenge. I think that it looks like some opportunity that way. I'm telling you, chase that one down. Chase that one down. There's other people that are doing it here for a living. Look at that. It's a very rewarding way to make a living. I couldn't imagine doing anything different. And I would encourage you to check that out. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to come here tonight. It's you gave up a Hawks game, doggone it, although John will know the score because he was, very impressive. Yeah. But guys, thank you so much for coming out. I'm in no hurry to get out of here, so if you have any questions, let me know. So thank you very much. Any closing words, Arun or Bob?
No, I think that was great. Actually, I'll tell you an anecdote is I was after IIT I went to Boeing and I was an analyst there, but then I started managing projects.
Yeah.
But then I decided to go to business school and get into investing. But every day is a little project to manage.
Yeah.
Every deal you're trying to get done. But then once you've done the deal, every initiative at a company is a little project to manage.
It is.
I still call myself a project manager.
We're surrounded by it. Yes.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I've been a project manager / instructional designer for the past 10 years. No longer. I'm now looking for a new job. But the thing that came to me just recently in my recent now transitioning to a new position is that project management for me had become very stale. Mm-hmm. Managing training projects, technical training projects, that part of it was exciting, but I had to move away from the development and the design and get over here and get the people. And that became boring. Mm-hmm. And so and now I don't want to do it anymore. Now I'm like, I don't want to be a project manager. This is really boring. For 10 years, it just moved into this, you got to, manage your schedule, get the people in line, get your deliverable.
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate the transparency of it. And the only way I'd say is I don't know if it was project management that was the problem as much as maybe the domain and the challenges weren't there. I think that's McClellan's thing, that 50 to 70% likelihood of success. It was just another day of making the donuts, you know? And try a different domain or a bigger project, you know? That's where I find it, you get a chance to stretch. I know I was supposed to be done at 8:30, so if you have any questions, come grab me. I'd be glad to hand it, but I know some of you have got to get going. Jen, yeah?
Yeah, there's a firm here in the Chicago area called Integrated Project Management. I'm sure you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
And they're just consultants that come in. So kind of what,
Yeah.
the direct opposite of what you had said about companies keeping the project manager and outsourcing the engineer, okay? And so when you go to those type of, external project managers, aren't you really giving up a lot of your trade secrets and?
Yeah, there's always risk with it. I would say there are definitely times I see that, but I will say overall, the model that I'll see is sometimes maybe they'll bring in the project manager, but that's usually when we're doing something that we haven't done before. It's a scale that's bigger than what we've done, or an expertise that we haven't done necessarily. So it definitely does happen, but the risk of any sort of service provider model is we're outsourcing that knowledge, right? So it's not just a payroll decision. I mean, there's the chance of any of our industry knowledge could be going out there. In fact, I heard somebody say that ASUS, the way that ASUS really, the electronics firm, the way they really made it was, I think Dell kept outsourcing more and more and more to them, and they just learned how to do it so well, and now they compete with Dell on tablets and all kinds of other things, right? Yeah. So
you made your own vendor.
So this is where I take that. Every decision has intended consequences and there's unintended consequences. Right? And so the unintended consequences of using an external project manager, the intended is they're going to help us deliver, and that'll be good, but the unintended consequences, we might lose control or some knowledge of stuff. Yeah. All right, any other questions?
What was the name of your podcast?
It's called the People and Projects Podcast. So if you go to any podcast app and just say People and Projects Podcast, I think most recent episode was like episode 132 or something like that. So it's a pretty broad span of different guests. Intersection of the people side, leadership, and project management. Airing more on the leadership side, because I think the project management stuff, we can do that. It's the people stuff that is. In fact, I was interviewing a CIO, and he goes, "The greatest joys of my career and the greatest pains are the same thing: people." Yeah, so we put a lot of focus in on that. All right, guys, have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks everyone again for coming. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.